According to the Tanakh, King Solomon began his reign as the wisest man and the builder of the temple in Jerusalem, consecrated to 𝗧𝗏𝗱𝗏 alone. But in his later years, the text, especially 1 Kings 11, says he turned away from the covenant and worshipped foreign gods, including the Baalim and Ashtoreth, Milcom, and Molech. These deities were associated with pagan rituals, some involving child sacrifice or idolatrous magic. From the biblical point of view, this was a catastrophic fall. The narrative makes clear that Solomon's turning to these cults was not holy wisdom, but apostasy, the corruption of divine knowledge through desire, political alliances, and indulgence in foreign rites. From a literal biblical view, Solomon's worship of the Baals was exactly what Exodus 20:18 condemned, invoking foreign powers in violation of divine law. But in Kabbalistic interpretation, this act reveals something subtler, that the same wisdom that grants dominion over spiritual forces, as Solomon had through the 𝗍𝗏𝗃 and the seal, can become destructive if the vessel, the human soul, loses its purity of intention. The witchcraft in Solomon's case, then, is not only external idolatry, but the internal corruption of sacred knowledge. The phrase, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," from Exodus 20:18, in Hebrew, it reads, 𝗍𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗃, you shall not let a 𝗍𝗏𝗃 live. The word 𝗍𝗏𝗃, usually translated as witch, comes from the root kashaf, meaning to use hidden or harmful magic. In the ancient Hebrew context, this referred not to all magic or spiritual activity, but specifically to acts of sorcery meant to harm, deceive, or invoke foreign powers. Such practices were seen as direct rebellion against the divine order and covenant with God, aligning the practitioner with idolatrous or demonic forces. Rabbinic Judaism later clarified that this prohibition applied to malicious sorcery, not to divine miracles or mystical wisdom. The Talmud, Sanhedrin 6:7a, discusses the difference between deceitful magic and actions performed through divine authority. In later Jewish mysticism, particularly Kabbalah, this distinction became even sharper. Holy magic, or the use of divine names, was considered a sacred form of wisdom, while impure magic was condemned as corrupt and selfish. Exodus 20:18 was interpreted literally for many centuries, especially in Christian Europe, and it became one of the main biblical justifications for the witch trials and executions during the late medieval and early modern periods. Originally, in its ancient Hebrew context, the verse referred to a specific kind of harmful sorcery, not to people practicing folk magic or herbalism. But when translated into Latin and English, the word 𝗍𝗏𝗃𝗏, sorceress or one who uses harmful magic, became witch. Over time, that translation took on a much broader meaning, and Christian authorities began to equate any form of supernatural or magical practice with demonic activity. From about the 15th to 18th centuries, this understanding, combined with superstition and fear of heresy, led to the execution of tens of thousands of accused witches across Europe and colonial America. These people, mostly women, were often innocent of any actual witchcraft and were victims of mass hysteria, political motives, or religious extremism. The Goetia and Enochian magic are two of the major systems of Western ceremonial magic, but they come from very different roots and represent almost opposite approaches to the spirit world. Goetia descends from Solomonic magic, a system that claims King Solomon bound 72 spirits or demons under divine authority, and it draws on the idea of divine names from Jewish tradition. Practitioners summon, command, and constrain these spirits through seals, divine names, and ritual purity, seeking knowledge, power, or service. Its worldview is hierarchical and dualistic. God grants the magician authority, but the entities are often rebellious, chaotic, or dangerous. The magician's task is to control them, to compel order from disorder, order out of chaos. Goetia is a type of European sorcery, often referred to as witchcraft, that has been transmitted through grimoires, books containing instructions for performing magical practices. Grimoires, also known as books of spells or spellbooks, serve as instructional manuals for various magical endeavors. They cover crafting magical objects, casting spells, performing divination, and summoning supernatural entities, such as angels, spirits, deities, and demons. The history of grimoires can be traced back to ancient Mesopotamia, where magical incantations were inscribed on cuneiform clay tablets. Ancient Egyptians also employed magical practices, including incantations inscribed on amulets. Throughout history, various cultures have contributed to magical practices. Early Christianity saw the use of grimoires by certain Gnostic sects, with texts like the Book of Enoch containing astrological and angelic information. King Solomon of Israel was linked with magic and sorcery, attributed to a book with incantations for summoning demons. The pseudographic Testament of Solomon, one of the oldest magical texts, narrates Solomon's use of a magical ring to command demons. With the ascent of Christianity, books on magic were frowned upon, and the spread of magical practices was often associated with paganism. This sentiment led to book burnings and the association of magical practitioners with heresy and witchcraft. The magical revival of 𝗧𝗿𝗱𝗶𝗁𝗱 gained momentum in the 19th century, spearheaded by figures like 𝗖𝗆𝗱𝗶𝗁𝗱𝗆 and Aleister Crowley. They interpreted and popularized magical traditions, incorporating elements from Kabbalah, Hermeticism, and ceremonial magic. 𝗖𝗆𝗰𝗋 emphasized personal transformation and ethical implications, while Crowley's works were written in support of his new religious movement, 𝗼𝗺𝗻. Contemporary practitioners of occultism and esotericism continue to engage with 𝗧𝗿𝗱𝗱𝗆. 𝗧𝗿𝗱𝗆 is secularized from its original religious context. It's not a belief system in the evangelical sense. It's a magical practice, sometimes framed in religious terms, but its goal is self-centered. It's about power and control over lower forces, not spiritual salvation or divine communion. Enochian magic, on the other hand, comes from the 16th century and was developed by Dr. John Dee and his squire Edward Kelly, who claimed to have received the system directly from angels. Rather than commanding demons, Dee's practice involved angelic communication. Through scrying sessions, the angels revealed a complex symbolic language, the Enochian language, along with calls, tablets, and cosmological structures. Enochian magic seeks ascent toward divine illumination, not dominion over infernal spirits. It's visionary, mystical, and highly structured, a kind of Christian Kabbalah aimed at the restoration of Adamic wisdom. A mystical reinterpretation of Jewish Kabbalah by certain Renaissance Christian thinkers who believed that humanity had lost the original knowledge that Adam possessed before the fall. According to biblical tradition, Adam, before eating from the tree of knowledge, possessed a direct understanding of God and creation. He could name animals, perceive the spiritual structure of the world, and live in harmony with divine order. This innate, holistic insight is often called Adamic wisdom. After the fall, however, humanity lost this intuitive, sacred knowledge. In the Christian mystical worldview, humans were left with fragmented understanding, moral struggle, and separation from God. During the Renaissance, thinkers such as Giovanni Pico della Mirandola and Johann Reuchlin studied Jewish Kabbalah and adapted it into a Christian framework. They interpreted Kabbalistic concepts like the Sephirot, divine emanations, and the Shem HaMephorash, 72 divine names, as tools for recovering lost spiritual knowledge. The goal was not merely intellectual study, but spiritual ascent, using Kabbalistic methods to restore the pre-fall clarity of Adamic understanding. This restoration meant reuniting the human soul with divine order, overcoming the alienation caused by sin, and regaining the capacity to perceive God's presence in the cosmos. Christian Kabbalists viewed this process as a way to harmonize scripture, philosophy, and mystical insight, effectively reconstructing the wisdom humans once enjoyed in Eden. In short, Christian Kabbalah treated Jewish mystical teachings as a roadmap to recover the original, divine knowledge Adam possessed before the fall, aiming for spiritual illumination and moral restoration, rather than mere intellectual understanding. Enochian magic is heavily influenced by biblical and Kabbalistic concepts, particularly angelology and divine hierarchies. Its goal is spiritual ascent and communion with angels, so it's closer to a mystical or theurgical system. Again, it's a magical practice, not a formal religious belief system. It's Judeo-Christian in orientation. So while both draw inspiration from Judaic texts or Kabbalistic ideas, only Enochian magic is explicitly focused on aligning with God or divine intelligences. 𝗧𝗿𝗱𝗶𝗁𝗍 is a system of ritual magic linked to King Solomon, where 72 spirits or demons were commanded, using divine names and seals. It became part of European ceremonial magic, often seen as witchcraft, focused on controlling lower spirits for practical ends, though originally intended as lawful, theurgical work. Enochian magic, developed by John Dee and Edward Kelly in the 16th century, draws on Kabbalistic and biblical ideas, but is fundamentally angelic, aiming for spiritual ascent, divine knowledge, and communion with angels, rather than control of spirits. The key difference is intent. 𝗧𝗿𝗱𝗶𝗁𝗍 works downward to command spirits, while Enochian works upward, to align with divine intelligences. In short, 𝗧𝗿𝗱𝗶𝗁𝗍 works downward, invoking and mastering the low,